Guys, this week's parashat is Parashat Beshalach. Now, let's do a little bit of a recap of where we are in the story of Shemot, where we are in the story of Exodus. So you had the first two parashiot, you had Shemot and you had Parashat Bo. And what happened is Moshe is introduced as the leader of the Jewish people. He comes, he's introduced to Hashem in front of the burning bush, and Hashem says, go, you're the leader, you're the one that's going to go and finally take the Jewish people out. After hundreds of years of servitude, after hundreds of years of hardship, of slavery, of all the children being put into mud, being bathed into the baths of Paro, Hashem says, now is the time, I finally decided, go, take them out. Moshe becomes the leader. And over the course of the next year, Hashem says, watch me prove it. Watch me prove through after one makkah after the next. Dam, the makkah of blood. The entire Nile turns to blood. Tzefardea, Kinim, Arov, every single plague that came on Egypt was only to prove one thing and one thing only. That Hashem is the master, the one who runs every part of nature, every part of the world. Moshe, as the messenger of Hashem, is the one that's about to go and embark on this big mission. Now we're at the end of it. 10 makot have just passed. 10 plagues, it's behind us. And finally the Egyptian people, they say, go, leave Egypt. We've had enough. What was the last makkah that the Egyptians had to suffer through? The death of every firstborn. We know that Paro was a firstborn, and he was scared. He knew that everything that Moshe had told him that was going to happen actually did come to fruition. The Nile turned to blood. The frogs, they came out of everywhere. Kinim, lice, the animals came, barad, came hail with fire mixed in. Everything that he said would happen, it happened. Moshe finally said, the last plague that's going to come on your land, Egypt, the death of every firstborn. Paro said, now I'm scared. He says, you know what, Moshe? Take your people. In the middle of the night, he came out, he said, take your people and go. Run. Vaisau, go. And what happened? The Egyptian people, they said, we're not leaving in the night like fugitives. We're not thieves in the night. We're leaving in the morning like men. We're leaving in the morning like free men. And that's what happened. They left in the morning, and all the Jewish people, they saddled their horses, their donkeys. They had really no time to prepare what they needed to do. They took their wheat, they took their yeast, whatever they could, and they made it out into the desert. But then the Egyptians, Paro, had a change of heart. And Paro said, you know what? So many years of having the Jewish people as our slaves, the ones who built Pitom and Ramses, who built the pyramids, there's no way that we're just going to let them go. As the Jewish people, finally, they tasted a little bit of freedom, and they were about to leave Egypt, Paro has this change of heart. And he says, you know what? Now I'm going to go and get them again. And Paro, he riles up the horses, he riles up his men, and he says, now let's go and chase them. So now, once again, the Egyptian people, the Jewish people, they're leaving, they thought they're free. And you see behind them, on every side of them, the back, the left, the right, Egyptian men, armed with weapons, with horses, with a military. What did the Jewish people have at the time? Just the sacks on their back, the clothes on their skin, that's all they had. That was what they had to go with. And now, the Jewish people are met with a sea in front of them and the Egyptians behind them. They have nowhere to go. You know, it's clear when the road is open, when there's different paths that you can take, there's where to run. But now the Jewish people, there's a sea in front of them and enemies behind them. Right here is where I want to take a snapshot. We begin our story in Parashat Beshalach at this moment. And right here is where I want to take a pause. You know, there was a shul in Eretz Yisrael. It was one of those shuls that wasn't run by a rabbi. It was one of those shuls that the guys got together. They used to pray, they had a minyan on Shabbat, they had a minyan, whatever. Well, a bunch of working guys. And one of the guys in the back, one of the Gabaim, he says, you know, there's this new guy that just came into the shul. He just walked in, stumbled in. He has a white shirt, he has a tie, has a jacket. This guy looks like he went to yeshiva, right? This guy looks like he knows Torah. Why don't you go and say a few words? The guy calls this new guest. He says, come up to the bima, say a couple of words. We don't have a rabbi here. Come say a couple of words. And the guy's like, no, listen, I'm just here to pray. You know, I just wanted to see what's going on. I heard this new shul. I'm just here to pray. And the guys are like in the shul, they're all heckling, no, come on, rabbi, kvod harav, you know. As an aside, it's funny, bullying is never okay, except when it's in the context of a shul. You know what I mean? In the shul, when they say, come, yalla, behavod, come, speak this, everyone jumps on the chance to bully the guy, right? But in either case, it's not okay. But yalla, in the end of the day, they say, come, go speak a little bit of Torah. You look like you went to yeshiva. You look like you're more religious than us, so go say a couple words. He says, fine, you know what? I'll go say a couple words. So the guy, he stands up in front of the bima, and he begins to speak. And he starts to recount this story in Parashat Beshalach. He says, the Jewish people, finally, they're about to leave Egypt. The Egyptians are behind them. They're stuck. They have nowhere to go. There's a sea in front of them. And this boy is speaking to the entire shul. And he says, there's one guy that stands up out of all of the Jewish people to want to take that chance. And who was his name? What was his name? His name was Gershon ben Aminadav. And the whole shul says, Gershon? What do you mean? His name is Nachshon ben Aminadav, not Gershon. The guy hears what's going on in the shul, the murmur, but he continues on anyway. This guy, Gershon, he stands up out of all the people and he goes to his wife and he says, wife, I have to do this. I have to stand up. I have to be the one to lead us out. Moshe is standing at the hem of the group of people. He says, but no one's taking the reins. Somebody's got to go and take initiative. So this guy, Gershon ben Aminadav, he stands up and the whole shul says, Gershon, where did you find this guy? This guy, you forced him to speak. He doesn't even know Torah. He doesn't know Gershon. It's really Nachshon. He's saying the wrong word. So this guy continues on. He hears the murmurs, but he continues on. He says Gershon. He says goodbye to his children. He says goodbye to his wife. He says goodbye to his family. And he finally steps up from all the people that were hesitating from stepping up. And he goes and he runs towards the water. And just before this guy, Gershon ben Aminadav, jumps into the water, who does he see already in the water? Nachshon ben Aminadav. And everyone says, so hold on. So he does know who Nachshon is. And this boy, he gets to the point of his story. He says, forever in history, for the next 3,500 years, this Gershon ben Aminadav will never be known as the one who took that leap of faith. Because forever it will be Nachshon who stood up, who took that chance, who went forward and made the leap, made that choice to go jump in the water when the path wasn't clear, to jump in the water when it didn't make sense how you were going to move forward. But he did it, and forever, he's going to be the one to know in history as the Jewish people who walked into the water first. Nachshon ben Aminadav. Whereas Gershon is the name, will always be forgotten, will always have been erased. And he says, my friends, in life, we are presented with opportunities. In life, you're presented with different mitzvot. In life, you're presented with different paths that you can take. What separates someone who achieves greatness, someone who achieves the highest level of whatever vocation he's trying to reach in, whether it's in finance, whether it's in your career, whether it's in your spirituality, whether it's in your own individual self-growth? What separates the man who makes something of himself and lady who makes something of themselves and the one who just sits by the wayside only to be known as Gershon? It's the one who makes the decision to jump in the water first. The one who says, it doesn't matter if I don't see the path clear. It doesn't matter that not every piece of the pie is completely clear in front of me. People think that before I go into a vocation, before I go into something, before I go into any sort of venture, everything has to make sense. I have to map out my class, I have to map out my plan. Before I get married to this one, I have to see, okay, what's the job? Where am I going to live? How is this going to work out? How's that going to work out? But the reality is that clarity doesn't come from the planning. Clarity comes only once you've taken the first step forward, and only then does the clarity reveal itself. Because the person who thinks that he's going to try to understand the entire vision before he takes that step will never actually take the step to begin with. Whenever a person wants to go and do something new, especially when it's outside of their comfort zone, the more that a person hesitates between the thought and the action, the greater the distance it builds between their mind and their hearts. The more that they wait, the less of a chance they're going to act. And so what Nachshon is teaching, that you want to be a man or a woman that's known as a doer, someone who accomplishes, someone who achieves, someone whose name will be remembered, act first. Naseh v'nishma. I don't have to have everything figured out. But what Hashem does expect of me is to take one step. That's all He expects, is for me to take one step. And if in our minds that one step seems too big, then guess what? Make the step smaller. Make the step smaller. And if you still can't take that step, make it even smaller. In life, there's the Nachshons and there's the Paro. Paro tried to outsmart God. How did he try to outsmart God? He said, I know the history of the entire Jewish people, Ba'al Peh, says Paro. Paro says that God made a covenant with the entire world, that after he brought the flood, in times of Noach, he promised that he would never destroy the world with a flood again. He says that God always punishes measure for measure. So the way that we react towards God, God reacts towards us. It's very simple. It's a simple dynamic. So Paro understood that because Hashem had promised to never destroy the world again through means of a flood, he said, you know how I'm going to best the Jewish people? You know how I'm going to get them to succumb to my rule? I'm going to take every Jewish boy and I'm going to drown him in the water. Because guess what? God can't attack me through the water. He promised he never would. He promised that he's not going to go and bring another flood. So I'm going to use the same vehicle that God promised he would never go against me with and drown every Jewish boy. Paro thought he was smart. He thought that he was clever. But what ended up happening with Paro? What was his downfall? There was a man who comes to the Chavetz Chaim. Who was the Chavetz Chaim? He was one of the Gadol Adors in the early 1920s, 1930s. He was the founder, the progenitor of the Lashon Hara movement. The one to not speak evil, not to guard your tongue, to watch what you say, watch the things that you hear, all these different ideas. That was the Chavetz Chaim. And there was a man who goes to the Chavetz Chaim, the Gadol Ador, and he says, Rabbi, I remember that one time when you told us that life is like a wheel. Life is like a galgal. Hashem has the ability to bring the people that are all the way on top of the world and bring them down to the lowest depths. That Hashem has the ability to bankrupt the person. Hashem has the ability to give a man riches overnight. Hashem can do anything. He's not limited by any sort of physicality. God can do it all. So he says, Rabbi, ever since you told me that, I began to leverage my finances. I began to leverage my wealth. He says, usually when a person goes into an investment, when he goes into some sort of stocks, the guy goes all in. But for me, Rabbi, I leveraged my stocks, my finances in contrary markets. When the speculative market, let's say technology, when technology goes down, usually commodities, they go up. Because when speculative markets, they go down, people want to put their money into something that they know is real. Silver, gold, some sort of commodity, right? He says, Rabbi, I have my money in both. So if one goes down, the other goes up, I'm still winning. I've leveraged the whole world. The God cannot take all my money away from me. So the Chavetz Chaim says, you're a fool. He says, you're right. Maybe God can't crash the entire market. It's impossible that contrary markets crash at the same time. That's not the way the world works. He says, God might not be able to take your money from you, but in an instant, God could take you from your money. In one instant. He says, and that's why you're a fool. And this was the downfall of Paro. Paro thought that he could outsmart God. He said, you know what, God promised, I'm not going to bring the flood. So what am I going to do? Drown all the boys in the water, the Nile. He's not going to bring the Nile against me. He said, yeah, you're right, but watch how I bring all of Egypt to the water. And watch what happens when you go and chase the Jews. And watch what happens when I bring the water down, not because I brought it to you, because you came by your own volition. You think that you can plan and have everything clear because you want to outsmart me? Because you want to have everything set along the way. That's the way you want to be? Watch what happens. Nachshon ben Aminadav doesn't ask. He says, I know what my duty is. There's a void here. There's a class that needs to be given. There's Torah that needs to be taught. There's something that needs to be learned. No one else will do it for me. Like the people say on the leaders, the Baalei Musar, they say, no one's coming to save you. No one's going to come and reach for your hand and pull you up unless you go and take that first step for yourself. Rav Galinsky says something fascinating. He says that a man's parnasa, a person's parnasa, the way a person makes a living, the way a person makes his money, it's as difficult for Hashem as it was for God to split the sea. It's difficult, man, to go and make a parnasa. Now the world is like a jungle. You have animals everywhere. This one's fighting for this piece of pie. This one's fighting for that piece of the pie. Everyone wants his thing, right? Anyone in real estate knows, right? Everyone's fighting for that 1% deal. And they're cutting heads for it. Right, Max? The 1% commission, huh? That's what it is. It's a dog-eat-dog world. And he says, for a man, parnasa is difficult. But also, what else is difficult, says Rav Galinsky? Splitting the sea. Splitting the sea was also hard for Hashem. Now, this brings two difficulties, Rav Galinsky says. Two questions that we can come to mind. A, why is it so difficult for a person to make a parnasa? Why is that so hard? And the second thing is, why was it hard for Hashem to split the sea? For Hashem to do anything? God can do anything in a snap of a finger. To say that, to bring down the Midrash Rabbah that says it was difficult for Hashem to split the sea, how do we understand that? He brings down a mashal. There was a boy who grew up in one of the shtetls of Europe. And he says, he's working very hard, he's working in the fields, his parents are very poor. They only have one pair of clothing each, no new clothing for Yom Tov. They never have meat, they barely have bread, a little bit of fish on Yamim Tovim, just for a little bit of oneg. These people was a family that were poor. And he says, you know what, Ima Abba, send me to America. Let me go to America, let me work. It's the land flowing with milk and money. Let me go, everyone's saying that America's the place to be. It's where you go, they make money, money's flowing everywhere. So I'll send back money and then I'll bring you guys back to America. And we're going to have a new life for each other. We're going to have a new sustenance, something new that we can both all live off of. They say, but Yasala, if you go to America, you're going to lose who you are. You're going to lose your payas. You're going to lose your kippah. You're going to lose your Shabbos. What's going to be? Your identity or the wealth? He says, I'm not going to lose it. I know who I am. I'm going to go. I'm going to make money. I'm going to earn it. I'm going to bring you guys back. And so lo and behold, he goes, and he realizes that working in America wasn't like what they said in the shtetls. It was much, much more difficult. They either forced them to work on Shabbat, they work on Saturdays, or the work was so hard, so laborsome, they would work 20 hours a day for a mere pay. And that's what it was. The boy, he had no money. He was living in tattered clothing. He couldn't afford the things that he thought he would be able to. He thought he'd be on top of the world, but on the other end of the stick, he was all the way at the bottom, back where he started. And so his parents, they started to write to him. They said, Yasala, it's been a few months. We want to know where you are. maybe you could send us a picture. Show us that you're really thriving. Show us that you really are holding by where you say you are, that you're holding in this place, in this nice apartment. You have nice clothing. You're about to buy your own horse, your own field, whatever. Yasla, send us a picture of us, of you. So he goes to his friend. He says, I can't show my parents this look, this disheveled self. My hair is overgrown. I have no clothing that's not ripped. Please, let me borrow some of your clothing, he asks his friend. Let me borrow your clothing. Slick my hair back, give me a haircut, just so I can send the picture to my parents to show them that everything's okay. So that's what he does. He borrows his clothing, he gets a little bit of a haircut, he takes the picture, he sends it off to his parents. His parents, they're so elated, they're so happy that they want to help their son. They give them, they said, you know what, Yasla? We're going to send one of our neighbors, he's actually coming to America, we're going to send him to your address, and we're going to show him this picture to know who to identify you by. We're going to send him this picture. He says, go, we're going to send you a little bit of a care package. It's not much, but it's a little bit something that we can help you with. So he goes, he sends the messenger takes the picture, he takes the address, he ships down to America on the ship for many, many months, and he goes, he knocks on the door, and he looks at the picture, and the boy opens up the door. That's a drastic juxtaposition to who this guy's looking at the picture. He says, I'm sorry, is there someone here that's, well-to-do, someone who looks good, who's making a good living? And this boy, Yasla, he doesn't know who this messenger is. He says, no, there's no one here by this address. There's no one here that you're looking for. And the guy closes the door, and the parcel was never delivered. Now, this is a mashal that Rav Glinsky brings down, but really, it's indicative of who we are. See, on Rosh Hashanah, on the beginning of the year, even the beginning of 2026, we come out with lofty goals. We say, this year is going to be different. This year is not going to be the year like I've lived last year. I'm finally going to make something of myself this year. I'm going to take upon myself this. I'm going to take upon myself that. This is going to be the year that I grow, that I make something of myself. And on that day, on Rosh Hashanah, when you've taken something upon yourself, you look different. When we've done teshuvah, when we've repented, we look different to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We look like that person with the crisp haircut, with the nice clothing. But over the course of the year, it's not that the goals have fallen short in our actions. It's that we've changed our own identities. We've changed the people that we identify as. There's an identity that we can establish once a year. We could say, on this day, on Rosh Hashanah, I expected myself to be someone who's going to dress a little bit more modestly, who's going to go and speak less Lashon Hara, who's going to go and learn Torah, and you look a certain way. I identify as that person. But then on a day-to-day basis, when the goal starts to slip from our fingers and we realize this is very hard, this is not so easy, the person's identity begins to shift. Instead of someone saying that I'm a guy who doesn't speak Lashon Hara, or I'm someone who goes and learns Torah, I'm someone who goes and betters myself every day, that identity shifts to, I couldn't do it. I'm someone who can't achieve that. And therefore that person, he looks different. So when the Jewish people, they came to the Yam Suf, why was it hard for Hashem to split it? Because the Yam Suf, the ocean, the water, it had a claim. He said, I don't see a difference between the Egyptians and the Jewish people. The Jewish people, they served idols in Egypt. The Egyptians, they served idols. Elo avdei avodah zarah ve'elo avdei avodah zarah. There's no difference between them. But Hashem says, you malach, the malach who controls the water, you might not be able to tell a difference between the Jewish people and the Egyptians, because on the outside, they look the same. But me, Hashem, I know what's within a person. I know what their true heart calls. I know what their real identity is. And therefore, only God is capable of splitting the sea. Only God is able to make the distinction between what's on the outside and what's on the inside. And so why was it hard? Why is it hard for a man to make a parnasah? Because the malach, the one in charge of the parnasah, is only Hashem. Because when the malach comes down, he says, listen, on Rosh Hashanah, this person was meant to make $1 million this year. He was meant to make $500,000 this year. But when the malach comes, when the angel comes down with that shefa, when he comes down with the bracha, with a picture of the man that stood on Rosh Hashanah and said, I'm going to be different this year. The people that we look like today don't look like the one on Rosh Hashanah. And that's why only Hashem can distinguish between who we look like today and the person that we look like on the new year. That's why it's hard to make a parnasah, because our identities are different. Yam Suf was hard because only Hashem can do it, and that's why they go together. And so this idea of how we identify really shapes the actions that we take. A person, he can have a goal. He can say, you know what? This year, I'm going to quit smoking. That's going to be one of the things that I want to take upon myself. But at the end of the day, if a person identifies himself as a smoker, can a person who identifies himself as a smoker ever drop the habit? Can a person who identifies himself as the addiction itself ever drop the addiction that he's trying to run away from? But if a person wakes up in the morning and says, you know what? I'm not a smoker today. I'm someone who comes to shul. This is who I am. When a person adopts that identity, then the actions, they're secondary. But if we're focusing on the action, but not changing the people that we are trying to become, the action becomes so much more difficult to achieve. A person who doesn't believe he can make it, a person who doesn't believe he can succeed, a person who doesn't believe he can actually make something of himself, no matter what he does, and no matter what connections are made with him, and no matter what blue chip stock is given to him in its foundation stage, he will never make that fortune. Because a person will always find the way to self-sabotage. And that brings us to the beginning of this week's parasha. This week's parasha, it begins with Vayehi Beshalach Paro. And it was when Paro sent out the Jewish people. Now, in the Hebrew language, there's tenses. There's past tense, there's present tense, there's future tense. There's also happy tense and non-happy tense. Let me give you an example. When it says V'haya, that's always milashon simcha. So we say in the Shema Yisrael, we say V'haya im shamoa, right? We say V'haya. When we say Vayehi, it really means the same thing, and it was, but it's always in the negative. It always means bilashon sar, when something's sad. So Vayehi Beshalach Paro, it's in the tense that's sad. You would think, why would it be sad? The Jewish people are finally leaving. The Jewish people, after many hundreds of years of slavery, of indoctrination, of being told that their time is not theirs, that their lives don't belong to them, why does the Torah say Vayechi? It should say Vechaya. It should say they're finally the Jewish people, they made it out, they're free. But what was the Chachamim? They teach us like this, that Vayechi Beshalach, why is it tsar? Because we had to wait for Paro to finally send us out. That it couldn't be that we were able to leave on our own volition. Imagine hundreds of years of servitude. Again, this slavery, it was generational. It was a woman would get pregnant, she would have children in her stomach, and she would realize and speak to her husband in the privacy of their own home and say, our children are going to be slaves. They're going to grow up in this servitude. They're going to grow up working hard. And they're going to go and they're going to get married and they're also going to have children. And they're going to know that their children are also going to be born into slavery. This slavery was generational. It was breaking. And yet finally when they had the opening to leave, the Jewish people, they couldn't take it. Only until Paro said, now go, leave. That's why it's Vayechi. Now, to take the Jewish people out of slavery, that's not that hard. To pull us out, to do the makot, to do the 10 miracles in Egypt, that's not that difficult. But to take slavery out of the person, that takes a miracle. You know, you have people today, again, which is one of the ideas which separates Nachshon and Paro. You have a person who he feels that his familiarity is something that he cannot leave. You know, I think Jordan Peterson says, the devil that I know is much better than the devil that I don't know, right? So no matter what a person does, no matter what leaps he takes, it's always going to be in the unknown. He's always not going to know what's going to be on the other side of the fence, what's going to be on the other side of that opportunity. I might fail, I might not, but where I am now is comfortable. And because it's comfortable to me, it's easier for me to not move and not take that chance. But you know the difference between someone who thinks like that and someone who just says, you know what, regardless of the situation, I can fail in either case. I can fail in either case. If I do nothing, I could fail. But if I try, I could also fail, but I also might succeed. The only guarantee in life is that if you do nothing, the guarantee for failure is 100%. But if a person takes that leap and says, you know what, Vayechi Beshalach Paro, I'm not going to be a slave to my own self. I'm going to take that mindset and shift it into something that's growth, something that's not fixed mindset, something that's growth mindset, something that's like, I know that I'm going to be able to make it because I've identified myself as someone that will, someone that already has. You know, there's a story, fascinating story, about a man who owned a CD store. And this is a dated story, obviously. You know, who has CD stores today anymore? But he had CD stores. What he would do, he would burn CDs, he would burn videos, he would burn music, burn audio. And there was one man, he was raising money for his yeshiva. He was raising money for his organization. He says, you know what? One of the things that we want to send off everyone in the organization after our main yearly dinner is we want to send them off with this CD. We're going to hire this composer. They're going to make a beautiful, touching song. It's going to tell about the goals of what the organization has to offer, that we're helping these orphans, we're helping the divorcees, we're helping all these people who don't have anything. And we're going to send everyone off with the CD. We need 2,000 copies to show people that as they leave, that there's something here, this organization is something that's worth investing into. So that if they didn't pull out their checkbooks by the end of the dinner, at least on the drive home, they can put it into their car and they can realize, wow, you know what? Maybe I should write a check. So they go to the store owner and they say, we need 2,000 copies of the CD burned by the dinner. There's no problem, good, everything's good and well. After the dinner's over, a few hours later, the store owner of the CD shop, he gets a call from who? The CEO of this organization. And he's screaming his head off. He says, "You wicked person, what did you do?" He said, how could you have made such an error? He says, you gave me 2,000 CDs, not of the simcha that we produced, not of this music that was supposed to pull on the heartstrings of the people to pull out their checkbooks. You gave us 2,000 CDs of some random rabbi's funeral obituary. He said, so after everybody comes home from the dinner, they're putting the CD in their car, they think they're going to go and shed tears, they're listening to some rabbis giving hespedim in Yiddish for some rabbi that no one even knows. And this man is thinking, he says, you know what, there were two customers that came that night. There was one guy who said, you know what, there's a big rabbi, he just passed away. We want to record maybe 60, 70 copies of the obituary. So people come home, they remember him by, something to remember them by. And I must have mixed the order. 2,000 copies of the obituary were made, and 60 copies of this Simcha song was given to all the people that came after the funeral. They're listening on the way home. He says, Yishtabach Shema, what's going to be? This guy says, it's an unbelievable mistake. This cost us millions of dollars in potential gains. What have you done? He says, don't worry, I'm going to make it right. Next time. He says, next time? It's not going to be a next time. He says, we're never going to use you again. He says, we're going to take you to Bedin. We're going to get this resolved in the Jewish court. He says, you know what? There's nothing I can do. At this point, I've done everything I can. The CD store owner, he's riling in his bed, can't sleep at night. He's thinking, Shtabach Shema, what a mistake. He says, I've done everything I can. I tried to make it right, but there's nothing that I can do. The guy goes to sleep. He can't sleep all night. But he tries to get a couple hours of a little rest as much as he could. He wakes up in the morning and he gets a phone call. Who is it? It's the same guy that tore his head off the night before. He gets on the phone and he says, you have no idea what happened. He says, what? You already called me last night. You already ripped me up. I already know what's going to be. You already told me the story. The same story as last night. He says, no, you have no idea what happened. He says, we just got a donation this morning, a donation that's bigger than whatever we anticipated raising on the entire foundation's dinner of the entire year, because they listened to the obituary of this rabbi. He says, what? He says, you have to tell me that story. He says, this man was a very, very wealthy man. The guy's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We tried to pull him into the organization. You know how it is with these guys. You try to pull him in through a friend who knows a guy. He didn't want to come, but Lamaisa, he ended up coming. He says, you know what? He's talking to me. He says, you know what? I wasn't really moved by your organization. I wasn't really going to give anything. He says, but you know what? I took this CD and I put it into my car and I said, you know what? Let me see the final closing thoughts. Let me see what this organization really has to offer. Let me hear what this whole story is all about. And then I hear that this is an obituary for Rabbi Obermeister. And he says, you know who Rabbi Obermeister was? And he gives him the story. He says, I grew up an orphan. He says, I grew up without a mother, without a father. I had no guidance. I had no one that could call me their own. For the rest of my life, I had no one that could take me in and teach me right from wrong, teach me where to go, how to grow, how to be the man that I am today. But this one rabbi saw something within me that no one else did, that no one else could. He took me in. He hosted me in for Shabbat deep meals. He taught me what it is to be a Torah Yid. He taught me what it is to be Shomer Torah Mitzvot, what it is to be a mensch, what it is to go and to guide and to lead. And he says, and I started bawling on the way home. He says, this rabbi, I haven't seen him in decades. And this man who turned my life around, he said, on that moment I made the decision that I'm going to give a check, that just like he took a chance on me, on a boy that he didn't know, I'm going to take a chance on an organization that I don't know myself. I'm going to write a check for $1 million, right on the spot. He says, your mistake, your CD, whatever you did, kol mishamayim, you made it work, and everything worked out in the end. In life, there's always these two paths. It's always, I know where I want to go, I know the goal, but I have to have all my ducks in a row. I have to have everything clear. Everything has to make sense to me. That's like the old Soviet mentality, that everything has to make sense. You know what I mean? Everything has to be logical. Everything has to go according to a certain plan. But Hashem says that if you wait for that plan to make sense, life can always turn and pivot in every single which way. The only thing that I expect from you is not to have everything figured out, but I expect you to take one step. When you take that one step, you don't have to be the first. Google wasn't the first search engine. Facebook wasn't the first social media company. Apple wasn't the first tech company. But they are the ones that we talk about today. They weren't the first, but they are the ones that we talk. So when it comes to our own lives, when it comes to our own goals and our own achievements, it starts with how we identify as people. Are we winners? Are we people that say, I know I can grow? I know I'm a growth-oriented person. I'm a person that success, it's ra'ui to me. And because I have that identity, the actions, they present themselves. And after I take that action, only then does the clarity come, and never vice versa. Are we the nachshons or are we the paros? Bezat Hashem, we should be zocheh to take this lesson. And always remember, Hashem expects of us one thing. Take that step. Take that leap. Be the one who jumps into the water, even when the path is not clear. Because only then do we know that at that point, we become the winners of our own lives. Hazak Baruch.